The air in Anacostia, in eastern Washington, D.C., was a thick mix of hot asphalt and diesel fumes from old buses, a scent that 12-year-old Isaiah Zay Cole knew as well as the weight of his backpack. It was the late 90s, and the colors of the sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, but the gray and despair of the neighborhood seemed to absorb the light, keeping the darkness on the ground. Isaiah was a tall, lanky, awkward boy with long legs and deep brown eyes that seemed to absorb the world but rarely reflected it back. His quietness was his armor, a way to avoid unwanted attention. He walked to school alone, the sound of his worn sneakers scraping on cracked pavement, the echo of the breeze making the dry leaves of the suburban trees rustle. He felt small, invisible. The limited third-person narration allowed a peek into the anxiety churning in his stomach. The dichotomy of Washington, D.C. was visible even from his bus window, the shining domes of the Capitol and the white marble monuments in the distance, a stark contrast to the grim reality of his community. The weight of the backpack on his shoulders was a familiar ache. The fabric of the history textbook, with its worn, faded cover, felt grimy in his hands. He hunched in his chair, which smelled of old wood and chalk, and tried to blend into the landscape of the classroom. He wanted to become as invisible as the silence that settled before the teacher asked for students to read aloud. He focused on each word, trying to disguise his southern drawl, a family inheritance from Alabama. But the effort made him stutter. Suppressed giggles rippled through the classroom, the sound a whip in his mind. He felt the heat of shame rising up his neck, a bitter taste in his mouth. It was then that Preston Hayes III, a white classmate who never spoke to him but always looked at him with an indifferent disdain, mimicked him. With an exaggerated, caricatured accent, Preston made Isaiah's voice sound like a grotesque joke. The teacher, a cynical man, did not intervene. Preston was the personification of easy privilege, able to ridicule others effortlessly, while Isaiah struggled to be seen and respected. The pinnacle of the humiliation happened after class, in the locker-lined hallway. The smell of floor wax mixed with the cold sweat of nervous bodies, the sound of hundreds of lockers banging shut. Preston and his group cornered Isaiah, blocking the exit. The accent was the focus of their mockery. People like you weren't meant to study. You were meant to clean up the messes real people make. The words were not just a personal attack. They were a blow against his dignity and that of his entire community. Isaiah's stomach clenched, the bitter taste in his mouth turning into a sense of nausea. The pain of the humiliation did not destroy him. It forged him. He did not respond. He simply turned and walked away. But he was no longer the boy he had been. From that moment on, the pain transformed into a silent decision. The sensory experience of seeing the corridors empty around him intensified the loneliness of the moment, but also ignited a flame within him. His revenge would not be with shouts or fists, but with the quietness of his determination. The walk home felt different. The familiar landscape of Anacostia was now tinged with the memory of the past few hours. He could smell the scent of home cooking, of barbecue and spices wafting from open kitchen windows, the sound of children playing and laughing on the sidewalks, the feel of the sun on his skin. All these things were still there, but filtered through a new lens of purpose. The city, with its dual reality of power and poverty, became a symbol of his journey. He would no longer be a reflection of his humble origins. He would use the very system that created this inequality to rise above it. He would use the law to fight for dignity and justice for people just like him. His path was not one of destruction, but of construction. The anger he felt wasn't a fire that would consume him, but a cold, hard stone in his gut, a source of unwavering strength. He got home, the silence of the house a stark contrast to the noise in his mind. He threw his backpack on the floor, sat on his bed, and sat in silence, the quietness a canvas for his thoughts. His mind replayed Preston's words over and over, not to re-experience the pain, but to memorize it, to make it part of him. He knew now what his purpose was. He would master the words, the rules, and the system that Preston and others like him used to maintain power. He would become an unstoppable force, a ghost in the machine, and his revenge would be perfectly, profoundly silent. He would show them all that his voice, once mocked, would one day be the one that spoke for justice. The quiet boy from Anacostia had a new name for himself: Isaiah Cole, attorney at law.
The pain of ridicule became the fuel for his journey. He had to leave home, his parents making a financial sacrifice that felt almost impossible to send him to live with his great-aunt in South Carolina. The landscape changed, but the weight in his chest remained the same. He found refuge in books, in libraries where the silence was a blessing and the scent of old paper and dust was a perfume of promise. The rough feel of the worn covers of ancient books under his fingers was a comforting texture. He devoured stories of black activists, of men and women who used their intellect as a weapon. He immersed himself in the life of Thurgood Marshall, the great-grandson of a slave, who became the first African-American Supreme Court justice. Marshall won 29 of the 32 cases he argued before the Supreme Court, using the law to dismantle segregation. Marshall's story of using the law to dismantle segregation resonated deeply with Isaiah. But it was the story of Edward Garrison Draper that truly shaped him, a black lawyer who was denied admission to the bar in 1857 for a lack of an essential criterion: being white. His posthumous admission 163 years later showed that delayed justice does not have to be denied justice. Isaiah could not wait for delayed justice. He decided he would build it with his own hands. He enrolled in law school, a new battlefield of privilege and prejudice. He was often the only black student in his classes, the stranger again. He could feel the stares of some of his peers, an echo of the disdain Preston Hayes III had expressed. But the pain he felt in his youth became his armor. He studied with an almost brutal intensity. The bitter taste of night-old coffee, the heavy weight of sleep he avoided to memorize every statute, every jurisprudence, these were the sensory details of his new life. His southern drawl, once a source of shame, became his signature. He honed it, using it to add weight and authenticity to his words, transforming it from a mark of a humble background to a mark of unwavering authority. It was during this period of tireless study that he met Dr. Elena Ramirez, his constitutional law professor. She, a woman of Hispanic descent, saw the hunger in his eyes, a determination that went beyond grades. Her voice was a calm, steady anchor in his internal turmoil. She introduced him to the world of racial justice within the system, and what was once a personal, silent revenge became a larger purpose. She helped him understand that the real fight was not against individuals, but against the system that empowers them. She had seen countless talented students from marginalized communities give up, exhausted by the systemic barriers. Her motivation was to guide young, brilliant minds like Isaiah's to reform the legal system from the inside out, using the very tools that were once used to oppress them. The chapter culminates with Isaiah's first legal victory, a minor case, defending a black sanitation worker who was falsely accused of theft. The victory was small, but the feeling of power was immense. The texture of the legal document in his hands was tangible proof that his plan was working. The taste was sweet and new, a complex blend of relief and satisfaction. He did not need violence or shouting. His revenge was the proof that intelligence and the law could, in fact, stand up against the system. He saw his future taking shape, no longer the humiliated victim, but the silent guardian of justice. His bitterness of his childhood was slowly being replaced by the quiet confidence of a man who found his path, a path forged in silence and paved with unyielding resolve. His journey to build a world where delayed justice was a thing of the past had truly begun.
28 years later, Isaiah Cole returned to Washington, D.C. He was no longer the awkward boy from Anacostia, but a renowned civil rights attorney with a reputation for never giving up. He drove his car through streets that were both familiar and alien. The landscape changed, but the essence the same. The city hummed with a different energy, a soundscape of gentrification mixed with the lingering echoes of the past. The scent of local barbecue stands and the beat of hip-hop still wafted from cars and corner shops, a soundtrack to his childhood. The same sunset colors he remembered now seemed to have a new meaning, a canvas painted with the memory of his pain and the promise of his fight. He hadn't returned to boast, he had returned to fight for his community. His first major case was defending a group of residents from a low-income neighborhood who were facing a predatory eviction by a real estate development firm. The tension began the moment he discovered the identity of the firm's CEO, Preston Hayes III. The shock of the reunion was not dramatic, but silent and loaded with history. The first business meeting took place in an elegant downtown office with a breathtaking view that made the distance between the top and the bottom of DC society seem insurmountable. Preston, with his forced smile and the posture of a man who had never been denied anything in life, didn't recognize him at first. He saw him only as a skilled lawyer, but one from a background he considered inferior. He addressed Isaiah with a casual, condescending air, a subtle disdain in his voice as he reviewed the case files. As they spoke, a flicker of recognition passed over Preston's face. The way Isaiah tilted his head, the cadence of his speech, something clicked. The arrogance on Preston's face shifted to a brief flicker of confusion, then to a palpable irritation, as if Isaiah's success were a personal insult. Preston's smile tightened, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the armrest of his chair. The handshake they shared was cold and indifferent, but Isaiah felt the tension, the unspoken history passing between them. The villain was now the personification of the very system that had oppressed Isaiah, his power and influence based on the wealth and privilege he had possessed since birth. His cruelty was now institutional, masked behind corporate jargon and legal maneuvering. He wasn't the boy who mocked a stutter, but the man who used the legal system to uphold the very prejudice he had once embodied. The first legal confrontation was a prologue. Preston offered a humiliating settlement to the residents, a pittance designed to quickly resolve the case and demoralize them. He used the same condescending tone of his youth, his voice dripping with false pity. "People like you need help understanding these things." The sound of Preston's arrogant voice was one Isaiah hadn't heard in nearly 30 years, but it was the exact echo of his childhood pain. Isaiah did not flinch. He refused the offer without hesitation. The feeling of power in his chest was different from his first victory. This was the silent revenge in action, not about what Preston said, but about the refusal to accept his narrative of inferiority. The look on Preston's face, a mix of disbelief and seething anger, was the first crack in his polished facade. The villain, accustomed to getting everything he wanted, was confused and enraged. His revenge had begun, not with a blow, but with a simple, quiet refusal to bow. The negotiation room felt charged with electricity. The stale air thickened with unspoken animosity. Preston tried to use his wealth as a weapon, his words like polished daggers. He talked about business realities and the necessity of progress. But Isaiah saw through it all. He saw the same boy who had once used his privilege to hurt him, now using the system to do the same to an entire community. Isaiah's response was measured, calm, and rooted in an unshakable sense of justice. He laid out the legal and ethical flaws in Preston's firm's actions, turning Preston's polished corporate facade into a flimsy paper shield. He used the very language of the law that he thought he had mastered to expose his cruelty. The feel of the conference table, cold and solid under his fingertips, grounded him. He knew this was just the beginning. The battle was set, not between two men, but between a man and the system he had come to represent. Isaiah's journey had come full circle, but his path was not one of hatred. It was one of quiet, dignified resistance, a path that would ultimately lead to justice.
The case went to trial. The courtroom was packed, the air heavy with the scent of old wood, dust, and the nervous energy of onlookers, a palpable tension that hummed beneath the judge's low voice. The sound of the gavel striking the wood echoed like a gunshot, marking the beginning of the final battle. Preston Hayes III, on the witness stand, was the personification of systemic racism. He attempted to deflect blame and portray himself as the victim, echoing the Karen archetype, twisting reality to present himself as the wronged party. He used legal bureaucracy and his social status as a shield. But Isaiah was prepared. His voice was calm and controlled, his southern drawl, which had once mocked him, now carrying the weight of authority and justice. He didn't attack Preston's character, he attacked the flaws in the system that Preston represented. He used data, facts, and the law to dismantle the villain's narrative, exposing the manipulation and cruelty behind the firm's actions. Isaiah methodically presented his case, each question a precise blow. He held up documents, highlighting discrepancies, revealing how the firm had deliberately omitted information to force the residents into accepting the eviction offer. The visual details were sharp, the beads of sweat on his brow, the flash of his eyes as they darted nervously, the slight tremor in his hands he tried to hide by gripping the stand. The sound of Isaiah's voice, calm and relentless, was the antithesis of Preston's internal panic. His revenge was not about humiliating Preston in front of everyone, but about exposing the truth for all to see what he was and what the system allowed him to be. The moment of catharsis arrived when Isaiah called a surprise witness, a former employee of Preston's firm. With a trembling voice and tears in her eyes, she revealed the extent to which the company had gone to dislodge the residents. Her testimony was a fatal blow, exposing the cruelty and lack of ethics of both the villain and his company. The sound of a pen clattering to the floor echoed in a sudden, total silence. Preston, his face pale, finally broke. He stammered, his polished demeanor crumbling into a pathetic display of a man losing control. He had always been so confident, so sure of his superiority, but now the truth was laid bare. He was just a man, hiding behind a system he thought would protect him forever. Isaiah looked at him, without triumph, only a quiet, resolute satisfaction. His southern drawl, which had once mocked him, was now a voice of authority and respect. He had won the case. The judge's declaration in favor of the residents was met with an initial stunned silence from the courtroom, followed by murmurs of approval and tears of relief. The silent revenge had come to fruition in a moment of pure justice. Outside the courtroom, the victory was met with cheers and tears. Isaiah felt exhausted, but the sense that justice had been served was a complex mix of relief and profound satisfaction. The taste of victory was bittersweet, for he knew the fight was far from over, but this specific battle had been won. His revenge wasn't personal, it was systemic, correcting a wrong on behalf of an entire community. He used the very tools of the system to prove its flaws, forging a path not just for himself, but for countless others who had been silenced.
Isaiah stepped out of the courthouse, the exhaustion weighing on his shoulders. A small crowd was waiting for him. They were the residents of his old neighborhood, neighbors, elders, and even some of the kids who had once ridiculed him, all mixed together in a sea of faces he recognized. They didn't scream or cheer loudly. They gave him a standing ovation, a silent, reverent applause. The sound was not a roar, but a resonant hum, the melody of redemption. He saw faces that had watched him, small and humiliated, and the recognition in their eyes was the final, sweetest revenge. The sight of those hands applauding was proof that his journey had been worth it. The revenge was not an act of destruction, but of construction and hope. He wasn't just a lawyer who won a case. He was a symbol of what was possible, a testament to the fact that their voices, once mocked, could be heard and respected. The epilogue shows Isaiah's life after the triumph. He establishes a foundation to help underserved students access a legal education, ensuring that his journey isn't an exception but a model. He becomes the mentor that Dr. Ramirez was for him, guiding the next generation of activists to fight for justice through the system. He lectures at Howard University, his alma mater, at a historic hub of Black excellence, teaching students the power of the law. The sound of young people, some with drawls just like his, studying and debating the law is the echo of his victory, proving that the system can be changed by those it once tried to break. He teaches them to use their personal stories as powerful weapons, to turn pain into purpose, and to understand that their unique backgrounds are not weaknesses, but sources of strength. The story doesn't end with the villain's defeat, but with the community empowered, denying the power of the system that once oppressed it. The final scene is Isaiah sitting in his law office, high in a building with a view of D.C. The view of the wealthy neighborhoods and the low-income neighborhoods blends on the horizon, a constant reminder of the fight that remains. The air in his office is clean, sterile, and quiet, a stark contrast to the humid, smog-filled air of his childhood. He holds an old photograph of his younger self standing next to Preston on the day of his humiliation. He doesn't feel hatred, but a deep, profound peace and a sense of satisfaction that the scorn he felt has been transformed into a powerful engine for change. The photo is proof of how far he has come, not by fighting one man, but by fighting the idea he represented. His revenge was not about the past, but about the future. It was, in every detail, perfectly silent. He had proven that the most powerful form of revenge is not to destroy one's enemy, but to build a world where the injustices they represent can no longer stand. He had come home, not to take something back, but to give something to his community, a voice, a legacy, and a future.